We're in Europe now, and the story that I'm going to share with you from Europe comes from one of the Scandinavian countries, Denmark. Some of you might know this story. It's called The Ugly Duckling. One summer, Mother Duck had 6 fluffy yellow ducklings, but when the last egg in the nest cracked open, out tumbled an odd gray duckling with a long neck. The other birds in the farmyard laughed at him. "You're an ugly duckling," they said. "You don't belong here." Mother Duck told them not to be unkind, but while she was looking after the rest of her brood, the other birds pecked at the gray duckling and made his life miserable. One day he ran under the hedge to hide, disturbing a flock of sparrows. "I must be ugly," he thought. "Even the sparrows fly away from me because they're afraid." The ugly duckling felt so unhappy that he decided to run away. Blinking back his tears, he waddled off across the fields and meadows until he came to a marsh where he met a family of wild ducks. "What an ugly duckling!" exclaimed the wild ducks. "You don't belong in our family." The ugly duckling crept away into the reeds. "It seems I don't belong anywhere," he sighed. The next day he left the marsh and walked on until he came to a lake. None of the birds there made him welcome, so the ugly duckling was left to find a home among the water weeds alone. Autumn came and the weather grew colder, and one day a pair of beautiful swans flew out over the lake. As the ugly duckling stared at their dazzling white feathers and elegant necks, a feeling of happiness flooded through him. "I wish I could be as beautiful as those birds and fly with them on huge white wings," he sighed. But the swans soon disappeared beyond the woods, and he was left alone once more on the gray, windy lake. Autumn turned to winter. The lake froze, and the ugly duckling shivered among the frosty reeds, with nobody to help him find food and shelter from the icy north wind. Just when he began to lose hope that winter would ever end, the lake began to melt, and the ugly duckling felt the warmth of the sun on his back. Spring had arrived. He preened his feathers and stretched his wings. To his surprise, they had grown strong over the winter. The ugly duckling ran, raised his wings, and swooped up into the air. "I'm flying," he cried excitedly, although there was nobody to hear. He flew once around the lake and then onward to explore what lay beyond. Down below, he soon saw a sparkling river, and there, to his delight, were the beautiful white birds he had admired in the autumn, gliding through the water with their heads held proud. The ugly duckling landed on the riverbank and watched them shyly, but the swans had seen him. "Come, swim with us," they called. The ugly duckling looked around, thinking they had spoken to somebody else, but there was no other bird nearby. "Who, me?" he said. "I don't belong here. I'm just an ugly duckling." "Come into the water," said the swans. The ugly duckling stepped timidly into the water, and the swans glided over to greet him. "Look at your reflection," they said. He looked at his reflection. A beautiful white bird stared back at him with a fine curving neck and dazzling white wings. "What has happened to me?" said the ugly duckling in astonishment. His companions smiled. "You were never an ugly duckling," they said. "You were a cygnet, and now you have become a swan." The beautiful swan was no longer ashamed. "I am a swan," he cried. Great happiness flooded through him. At last, he knew where he belonged. Was that like the story you had heard before?